So today I want to speak a little bit about something that's called focusing on patience versus focusing on perfection. My observation is that sometimes we get hung up with these ideas that we've had in our head, and I have no idea where they came from, although I could guess, and I think you could guess too, that we have this picture in our mind or our thought in our mind in terms of what perfection looks like. And I hate to break the news to you, but quite often, number one, perfection is often an impossibility. And number two, most of the time, those pictures that we've been given did not come from us. In many cases, they came from society. They were passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. And guess what? We bought it hook, line, and sinker. Like, this is the way something is supposed to look like. This is the way this thing is supposed to be. This is the way we're supposed to be doing it. And quite frankly, it's just not true. It's not. So a story to share with you, I was working with a client that I was coaching. And the client, we had been working on this thought, this idea of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is something very common for people that are just starting a business, whether it's a coach, a consultant, or anything else like that, for people that are new in doing what they're doing, and they don't feel comfortable all of a sudden putting their shingle out and saying, hey, guess what? I am now whatever I am now. And the reason they feel like they've got imposter syndrome is because they have a false belief that thinks that everybody who takes their first step in terms of doing something they're passionate about, that they should be doing it perfectly, that they need to be better than everybody else, that everything that they do is outstanding and absolutely perfect. You would be amazed at how many people it stops them dead in their tracks from taking the first step out the door to do what they really are called to do. It's surprising to me. So I'm working with this one client, and a couple of months ago, we worked on imposter syndrome. And we were working on it. So the first month, it went pretty good. Talked to her about a couple months ago, and she's doing great. Talked to her a month ago, she was doing great. Talked to her a couple days ago, and all of a sudden, not doing so good. And I said, well, what's the problem? And she said, well, I know that this thing is there, and I keep working on it, and I don't understand why I should have to be working on it, because I've already been working on it for a while. And she said, I should have it figured out by now. I should have it all figured out by now. Because after all, we've been working on it for a couple of months now, Mike. We've been working on it for a couple of months. You see, what happened with my client is she was focused on or thought that she should have had it been done perfectly. In other words, this thing that we were working on should not be showing up again. And the truth is, that is simply not the way that it works. And in her mind, what she was doing was she was telling herself, it should look like this. And guess what it wasn't looking like? This. And in her mind, what did this look like? It looked like this limited belief that she was working on should not be showing up. It shouldn't be showing up. Why? Well, because we've already dealt with this. There's no reason for this thing to be showing up. I thought the thing that was powerful about this story, because my belief is everybody that I work with from a coaching perspective has something to teach me on a personal level. In other words, when you're a coach specifically, the people that you show up in your coaching generally are there to teach you pretty profound lessons if you're paying attention. And as I thought about that, the lesson for me is I thought, hey, Mike, where is this showing up in your own spiritual life, in your own spiritual path, in your own spiritual growth? In other words, how many times do we start doing this walk, this dance with our divinity, as I call it, this walk in our own spiritual growth? And we learn some new technique, or we learn some new prayer, or we learn some new affirmation, and we dive in, and we start working about it. And we have, each and every one of us, has these preconceived notions that is saying, well, once I do this, then it should look like this. Anybody with me? Anybody with me? Yeah, we all do that. And we all have these preconceived notions of what it should look like. And all of a sudden, this thing circles back and it shows up again. And we sit there and we tell ourselves, well, this shouldn't be happening. It should be looking like this, and it's not. But it's there. And so now, what do? Well, I can share with you what I do. I go into shame. I go into guilt. I go into why haven't I figured this out yet? Why should this thing still be showing up? Why is this thing showing up at all? Instead of just understanding the truth. The truth is, we all came down here to learn certain lessons. We never said when those lessons were going to show up. That wasn't part of the deal. We just came down here to learn lessons. And what happens is, when you really start studying this stuff, you understand that where you're standing right here and right now is exactly where you're supposed to be. And those things that are showing up in our life are exactly what's supposed to be showing up in our life. Because our soul has decided that we needed to learn a lesson. And guess what happens if we don't learn it the first time? It comes back. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean there's shame. It doesn't mean there's guilt. It doesn't mean you screwed anything up. It doesn't. It just means that there's something else to learn. It's kind of like peeling the onion, as we say. So maybe there's a deeper learning. Maybe there's a deeper understanding that's there for us to learn. But what often happens is when this stuff shows up, what's the first thing that we do? Shouldn't be showing up. This shouldn't be happening. I've got all this figured out. It shouldn't be looking like this, but we don't. Because the normal reaction is normally it's oh my goodness, this thing is showing up again. Instead of just going, oh, I got it. I got some work to do. It reminds me of nature. I always look to nature when I'm trying to figure things out. And I think the Chinese bamboo is one of the most beautiful trees, beautiful plants that there is. The story of the Chinese bamboo is pretty fascinating. So what they do is they take the seed and they put it in the ground and they start watering it. They make sure it gets sunshine. They make sure that they're keeping the weeds out of it. They prune it. They take care of it. They're nurturing it. And they do all this stuff. And they do it for the first year. And guess what shows up? Nothing. And then they make sure they keep watering it. They make sure they keep making sure it gets sunshine. They're making sure that keeps all the weeds out of it. And after the second year, guess what shows up? Nothing. And then the third year goes by, and guess what happens? Nothing. And then the fourth year goes by, and guess what shows up? Nothing. And then the fifth year finally shows up. 5 years. What have we been doing? We're watering. We're making sure there's sunshine. We're making sure that we're pruning it and everything else like that, the garden, the dirt around it. And then finally, in the fifth year, within 6 weeks, that tree grows 80 feet. What's been happening for those 5 years? Do you think that underneath the ground nothing is happening? Or do you think maybe in order for this thing to grow that fast, that quick, that big, do you think that maybe that what's happening is the roots are going down to be able to support a structure that big? Because maybe this tree and the cells within that seed intuitively knows if we're going to grow that big, that quick, we better make sure our foundation is rock solid. Yeah. How does that fit in our own spiritual lives? How many times have we spent a lot of time working on certain things that we're trying to figure out in our own lives? We're trying to deal with a problem, a health challenge, our finances, our relationships, all the different things we human beings come down here to play with. And we work on it, and there just doesn't seem to be anything happening. It happens. It's part of the journey. Right? I want to share something with you from a book that's called The Practicing Mind by Thomas Sterner. It's one of my favorite little books. And I want to talk about this thought or this idea of a plant and this thought or this idea of what we think things should be looking like. Let's see what nature teaches us every day as we walk past the flowers in our garden. At what point is a flower perfect? It is perfect when it is nothing more than a seed in your hand waiting to be planted. All that it will ever be is there in that moment. It is perfect when it first starts to germinate unseen under several inches of soil. This is when it displays its first signs of the miracle we call creation. How about when it pokes its head through the surface and sees the face of the sun for the very first time? All its energies have gone into reaching for this source of life. Until this point, it had nothing more than an inner voice telling it which way to grow. What about when it begins to flower? This is when its individual properties start to be seen. The shape of the leaves, the number of the blooms, all are unique to this one flower, even among the other flowers of the same species. Or is it the stage of the full bloom, the crescendo of all the energy and effort the flower expanded to reach this point in its life? Let's not forget its humble and quiet ending. When it returns to the soil from where it came, at what point is a flower perfect? I hope you already know the answer. It is always perfect. It is always perfect. It is perfect at being wherever it is and whatever the stage of growth is at that moment. It is perfect at being a seed when it's placed in the ground at the moment in time. It's exactly what it's supposed to be, a seed. Just because it does not have brightly colored blooms doesn't mean it's not a good flower seed. When it first sprouts through the ground, it is not imperfect because it displays only the green color. At each stage of growth, from seed to full bloom and beyond, it is perfect at being a flower at that particular stage of a flower's life. A flower must start as a seed, and it will not budge 1 millimeter towards its potential grandeur of full bloom without the nourishment of water, soil, sun, and also time. It takes time for all of these elements to work together to produce the flower. Do you think that a flower seed sits in the ground and says, "This is going to take forever. I have to push all this dirt out of my way just to get to the surface and see the sun. Every time it rains or somebody has to water me, I'm soaking wet and surrounded by mud. When do I get to bloom? That's when I'll be happy. That's when everybody will be impressed with me. I hope I'm an orchid and not some wildflower nobody notices. Orchids have it all. No, wait. I want to be an oak tree. They're bigger than anybody else in the forest, and they live longer, too." As silly as the flower's monologue might sound, it is exactly what we do, and they say every day and in every way. We consciously or unconsciously pick a point of reference in whatever we do and decide nothing will be right until we get to that point. If you step back and observe your internal dialogue from time to time during the day, you'll be amazed at how hard you work against yourself with this type of thinking. The flower actually is always perfect. So in other words, understanding and realizing patience is really what we're looking at and really what we're thinking about, right? I often use the analogy with my clients about the airplane taking off. So I want you to think about this. For everybody that's flown, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're sitting there, you go get on the airplane, they load everybody up, and they taxi out to the runway. And now you're sitting at the very end of the runway, you're waiting for final clearance, and finally they say, "Go ahead and take off." And what happens? What happens is the pilot takes the thrusters and jams it down to the ground, and all of a sudden you start moving. And there is a ton of energy, there's a ton of commotion, and the next thing you know, you are rolling down the runway and gaining speed, and gaining more speed, and gaining more speed. Now, I just want you to stop and think about something for a minute. At any point in time in the process, do you see the pilot going, "Oh my God, this isn't going to take off"? I mean, seriously, think about it. But I want you to give that analogy in terms of our own spiritual growth and our own spiritual development. How often are we running around going, "Oh my God, am I ever going to take off?" Yeah, been there, done that. And we all do it. We all do it. And so the plane continues down the runway. And you know what's happening? It's still on the ground. It hasn't taken off. But what's really happening? Now look, I am not an engineer or a scientist, and I can't explain it that well, but what I can tell you I do know is that what's happening is the wings on the airplane, what's happening is they're splitting the air. And the air that's going down is basically being shoved into the ground, and then it bounces off the ground, and it creates lift. And it's pushing the plane off the ground. And when enough lift is established, it's literally impossible for a plane not to take off. Did you know that? It's impossible for it not to take off as long as everything is right, as long as nothing mechanically is wrong with it. As long as there's enough speed, as long as there's enough momentum, eventually that plane is going to take up off the ground. But again, the pilots know that. They're not running around like chickens with their heads cut off screaming that the plane's not going to take off. That's not what happens. For the majority of the time the plane is on that runway, it is on the ground. It's at the very last second. If you know, most of the times, it's on the ground most of the time before it literally takes off and lifts. And yet, almost every single time, the plane comes off the ground and the plane lifts. Amen. Praise Jesus. Yes. So again, patience. The pilots know it's going to take a while for it to get some momentum. They understand that there's going to need to be some more energy, some more power, some more stuff that needs to happen. All of this stuff is happening without them doing anything more than just holding the plane on track, making sure we're going down the runway, making sure all the little things that need to happen to get that plane going. And what do? They let nature do what it needs to do and just lift the plane off the ground. And that's what they do. How does that relate to our own spiritual journey? Are we able to trust that what we're doing here, that when we start to do this work on ourselves, when we walk into these doors, we understand that we're on a spiritual journey and there's spiritual principles at play? And if we know those spiritual principles and we know how to apply those principles, it's just a matter of continuing to apply them and work them in your daily life. And then all of a sudden, what happens? We get lift. We get lift, right? Of course, we're always going to want to bring God into this equation, right? Isn't that what we do here? Of course it is. One of my favorite little books is God Never Fails by Mary Cupperfly. I found this little gem years ago. And what she says, not a moment too late does God or the divine help and save. Not a moment too late do we receive our guidance when we listen, watch, and pray. Not a moment too late do we receive our strength, courage, and renewed faith when we take firm hold of truth. Not a moment too late will outer changes be effected when we are still and remember that the divine is always with us, and I would add, and is always on. Perhaps you will say that this may be true in some cases, but that it's not been true for you. You may feel that the divine has not helped you, that you've waited and waited and waited in vain for assistance that you dearly desired and needed, but that it has never come. If this is your thought, look at the reasons for the delay. There's always a reason beyond that which appears to be an unanswered prayer or a so-called unheeded cry for help. God is ever willing to help, to lift, to rescue us from any situation. It is we who are always ready, ready and willing to be helped. Remember that there are always two involved in the process of a rescue, the rescuer and the one who is to be rescued. There must be coordination between the two. If we will look impersonally for a few moments at our attitude towards our healing, whether it is physical, emotional, or financial state of our being, perhaps we will see why the rescue has not been concluded to our satisfaction. So another story to share with you. I was working with another client, very successful client in their field of what they do. And everything was going great. So in other words, working on the stuff that they wanted to work on, moving forward and everything. And then all of a sudden, this person happened to hit a bump in the road, and I got him on the phone. I said, how is it going? He says, lousy. And I said, why is it going lousy? And he said, I have just hit this major mindset thing that I can't get through. And I said, what's the mindset thing? And he said, the mindset issue is that I'm a failure. Now, you have to understand, this person is extremely successful. I mean, success, if you were to notice it just from a observing standpoint, professionally, financially, health-wise, extremely successful. And I said, well, tell me about I'm a failure. And he said, look, this isn't anything that's new for me. I've had it going on for years and years and years. And I said, okay, so tell me about it. He said, yeah. He goes, I know I've got this limited belief, but I can't get rid of it. I said, what? And he said, I can't change this limited belief. It was in that moment that all of a sudden I had a flash of a chessboard. I don't know how many here have played the game of chess, but what happens is you move all the pieces around, and then eventually what happens is you're playing with your king, and your king can get captured, and it becomes check or checkmate, which means it can no longer move without somebody taking out that particular piece. And what I saw on this chessboard was he just put himself, without even knowing it, in checkmate. Why did he do that? What's he telling himself? I can't change this. I can't change this. Do you see what he was doing? Just from a mindset standpoint, I can't change this limited belief. So in other words, no matter how hard I work, no matter how many prayers I say, no matter how much I open myself up to surrendering to this thing, I cannot change this. And I said, do you realize what you're doing? You've completely just shut everything down for you to be able to change anything that you're wanting to regarding the situation, because you're telling yourself, no matter what, you can't change it. Do you know how powerful you are? Do you understand that when you tell yourself you can't change anything, at that point in time, checkmate, the game is over. It's over. That's it. We can't do anything. Why? Because of who and what you are, which is a pretty powerful creator, way more than we even understand. Way more than we even understand. And once again, I thought to myself, for me, this was a powerful, powerful lesson. Because I thought to myself, as I was working with him, and I got off the phone and I sat there and I said, wow, where in my own spiritual life, where am I telling myself I can't change this limited belief? I can't do this. And for me, it was a pretty profound discovery as I looked back in my life and I looked at different areas of my life and I looked at different times in my life where I honestly felt I couldn't change it. And here's the funny part that I realized as I started playing with this, I started thinking about this. I said, I realized that in the meantime, what am I doing? I'm doing everything that I'm told to be doing. I'm doing affirmations. I'm doing denials. I'm praying. I'm asking, dear God, please help me. Right? Fix it. Fix this. Guess what? It didn't work. Why didn't it work? It didn't work because I kept thinking this thing can't be changed. That's why it didn't work. And all of a sudden, when I realized that, it was like, oh my God. I can't believe I was doing that to myself. That's how powerful we are, though. And that is why we always say here at Unity that awareness, what's going on in here, is the most powerful thing that you can figure out and do. Having awareness. We all have thoughts that aren't exactly serving us. Some of them have more of an impact on us than other ones. Do you think that this thought may have had an impact on him, thinking that he was going to fail? Do you think maybe if he didn't think he could change that? Do you think that the impact it had on me when I'm living my life and I'm trying to figure out why this stuff isn't changing, do you think that thought may have had something to do with it? My experience is it had a huge impact on me. Huge impact on me. And why? Because I'm sitting there focused on, well, it should look like this, it should look like this, and it should look like this, and just being honest, I wasn't being honest with what was going on in my life. Because I'm focused on all the other stuff, the technical stuff that's supposed to be going on, but I'm not paying attention to what's going on in here. That's where the difference is. That's where all the power is. Speaking of patience versus perfection, anybody know what that is? La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Anybody ever been there? It's an amazing story, and it's an absolutely amazing structure. So Gaudi is the architect on this. When he was 21 years old, this had already been designed, and he came on the team and took over the project. The original design of it was a very traditional Catholic church. That's what it is. It's a Catholic church. Gaudi worked on this time from 1863 until 1926 when he died. And as he worked on it throughout his entire life, when he actually passed away, he wasn't done. He wasn't even close to being done. This is the inside of the church. Gaudi wanted to combine religion, nature, and architecture. When you walk inside of this thing, it is a sight to behold like nothing I've ever seen, and I've been inside of a lot of the major cathedrals in the world. This thing is unlike any. Those pillars look like trees. It is absolutely stunning to walk inside of this thing. They've got stained glass that as it goes throughout the course of the day, what happens is the stained glass moves through the inside of the sanctuary, and it changes the color, the ambiance, and everything within that structure. It is absolutely incredible to see everything. And guess what? It's still not done. They estimate it's going to be finished in 2026, which means they will have been working on it for 146 years. 146 years. I didn't read any stories about Gaudi walking around going, why isn't it done yet? Why isn't it done yet? I don't get it. It's not working. And they had a lot of setbacks. I'm not going to go into the history of the church, but they had a ton of setbacks during the process of it. Patience. Patience versus perfection. Patience versus perfection. So just a couple of final thoughts as we start to wrap up a few things. Number one, understand from a spiritual standpoint, you are exactly where you're supposed to be on your spiritual journey. You're not behind. You haven't screwed up anything. You haven't screwed anything up. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. If you were supposed to be somewhere else, you would be. That's the way this thing works. Yes, that's the way it works. Whatever is showing up for you now, just understand that that's what you're supposed to be working on, is whatever's showing up now. Not what showed up 5 years ago, not what you think is going to show up 10 years from now. It's whatever's showing up right here, right now. That's what you're supposed to be working on. That's the way the universe works. Focus on patience versus perfection. Patience, patience, patience. And the last thing is, don't forget about God. I would also add, don't forget about some self-compassion. Also, don't forget that you're doing it exactly as you were designed to do it, and that's going to look a lot different than the way I do it, the way that Ravi's doing it, the way that Mark's doing it, and everybody else. It just looks different. And you know what? That's perfect. That's the way you're meant to do it. That's the way you're meant to grow. And that's absolutely perfect. Perfect. And ultimately, you got this. So I'm just going to throw some affirmations in there that are helpful. The perfect action of God directs every thought I think, every move I make, and all is well. The Spirit of God is active within me, promoting order, harmony, and healing. God's perfect action directs my efforts, guides my desires, and prospers my endeavors. And another affirmation, the perfect action of God illumines and inspires me. It moves through my body as renewed life, through my affairs as abundant success. So if any of those strike your fancy, I suggest use them. And I'm going to be starting to share some affirmations as we go through this. So in closing, my hope and prayer for you is just to understand how beautiful, how divine, and how incredibly perfect your own spiritual journey is. It's sacred ground that we're talking about here. It is to be taken lightly somewhat. Don't want to take this stuff too seriously. But in the same respect, just understand that we all have a unique way of doing our own thing. And regardless of what it looks like for everybody else, your way is exactly the way that you're supposed to be doing it. And it's perfect. Just remember to focus on patience versus perfection. God bless. Thank you.